Hello everyone, welcome to International Security and Peace class. I wanted to take a lecture video to cover 2 weeks that I missed for the class. Let's figure it out when I exactly missed the class. Let's see. Uh, let's see here. Here's syllabus. I'm following the syllabus exactly. Um, so actually I missed week week 2. So September 12th I missed a class, and then I had a class week 3, and on week 3 we did the realism, the first realism. And then in this video, so I wanted to finish up week 3. That's the realism 2. So we will make up week 2. And then I also missed week 4, liberalism. So I wanted to finish up liberalism and week 12 realism and liberalism. I want to finish up. And according to my syllabus, I think I made a mistake because October 3rd it's a national holiday, so there must be no class whatsoever. But I put constructivism, even though I knew it. But that class will be covered on Makeup Week. That is when December 12th. December 12th, we will have a class that is Makeup class for October 3rd. So there will be no problem. You don't have to worry about. So October 10th, we'll have a class, and on October 10th we will talk about constructivism. And so the class October 10th we will talk about constructivism, and October 6th we will so October 10th we will have a constructivism. October 17th we will talk about peace security, what's peace study, and midterm. So I also, yeah, I didn't make a mistake here. So October 24th, no class because of midterm period. So we will not have a class. And October 31, we will talk about feminism. So it will be like go down. So October 31, we'll talk about feminism, and then November we'll start war, terrorism, genocide, ethnic conflict. Yeah, war, terrorism, genocide, and masculine ethnic conflict. And December, let's figure it out what kind of things we can learn. Okay, let's then start our discussion on liberal realism. So I explained there are three major traditional approach to study international relations. That is realism. First one is realism, second liberalism, third constructivism. So that's the three main idea in studying international relations. So last time we talked about difference between security and survival. Survival is just existential condition, and security is ability to pursue cherished political and social ambitions. So security is just more than survival. So when we talk about security, it is not just talk about existence. So security is more like ambitious term. That's what we actually talked about. We talked about state, and we mainly focus on what is security we are actually talking about. So there are military security, political security, economic security, societal security, environmental security, and then maybe we can add more securities in there. But we mainly focus on from national perspective rather than a personal perspective. So, like, it was very interesting to see the difference between male and female students, and then female students feel more insecure than male students. So male students feel more safe, right? That's maybe there are some gender issues in the security, but this class doesn't really cover that because it's more like personal. And then we start with realism. So the shared common commitment of realist tradition. So realist has transformed into very different kinds of realism. But still, when we say this is realism, there must be shared commonality among the realists. That is these five things. The first one, major analysis. So which one we look at? That's very important. So like liberalism, they might see international organization, or constructivism, they may focus on individual leaders, but uh, realist, they mainly focus on state. So state is a major analysis. So the level of analysis is more like a state. And they are interested in power and security. They are interested in how a state could survive, how state secure, or how state accumulate power, or how state take power away from a certain states. That's the major interest that realists have. And they look at international relations is more like a pessimistic rather than I can't remember the opposite word of pessimistic. Optimistic, sorry. Yeah, so they look at they look at the international relations pessimistic. So if there is, I mean, I talked I told you that the realist idea stems from Hobbesian's idea, the man, every man against every man. In Korean, 만인에 대한 만인의 투쟁. You probably heard a lot when you're in high school, and then the realist idea is actually came from the Hobbesian's perspective, the Hobbesian's point of view. So that's why it's very pessimist. It's never great, never be optimistic. And then they look at the international relations as zero-sum game. It's your loss is my gain. My loss will be your gain. So like I compare this one with pizza slice. So if there are 10 slices of pizza, maybe if you take that, and let's say there are 10 slices of pizza, and then if you take 10, then I got nothing, right? If you take 8 slices of pizza, then I'll get 2 slices of pizza. That's the shared commitment of realist tradition. So if there are, I mean, we will learn different kinds of realism, but there's 5 things in common, even though there are different kinds of realist and realism. Then we start actually with classical realism. Classical realism stems from the idea of human nature. So they think that the human nature is nasty, self-interested, and they're selfish, and they are always lost for power. So this state is actually the aggregations of population, right? So the state is just a bunch of people out there, and the state moves based on what people think or people's decision. So they think that the state actually reasonable, human. So that's why. Okay, so I wanted to check. Sorry, I wanted to check the mic, whether I turn on the mic or not. If I didn't turn on the mic, then it's completely waste. So I just was so surprised that I didn't turn on the microphone. I checked it. Okay, so uh, the classical realists, they talk about like human nature. So the state resembles human nature. Human nature is not good. So state is also not good. So state always lost power, and then why there's war? Because of the human nature. So aggressive leaders or domestic political system that gives greedy parochial groups that the opportunity to pursue self-serving. So there are some leaders or some domestic groups who are greedy for power. They have one opportunity to have more power. So that's why there was always war. And the main goal of state is survive. They think that the survival is the most important, so existence. So how can we achieve this survival? The goal is to have more power. If we have more power, then it's not easy to attack. So that's why the classical realist thinks that the more power you have, the more you feel the secure. So that's the theory. So classical realists usually like Hans Morgenthau. He's the major scholar for classical realism. That's what we actually have learned. And then we went one more steps to learn neorealism. It's different from classical realism. So it goes one more step. So classical realists, they talk about like human nature, but neorealism thinks that no, it's not okay. They think that they actually have observed that even though state has different perspective or different form of government, or they have different kind of political arrangement, if uh, if they face the state face very similar international structure, then they act in a very similar way. So that's observation that they observe. So criticize classical realism. They saying that if if states behave based on human nature, then every human nature might be different, right? Then the state should act in a different way. But they actually have observed that and conclude that even though domestic political arrangements, so some countries may be democracy, and some country may be kingship, or some country is really large by population or by land. Some countries are very small. It doesn't really matter what kind of countries it is, but if they have if they face very similar situation, then they act in a very similar way. So they gave an example of balance of power. So I explained what is balance of power. The state tried to balance each other. So they look at why then state act in a similar way. It's because of international structure. So that's how neo-realism came from. So they focus on international structure. So international structure means what? How many great powers we have. So like um, how many great powers we have. Sometimes number one, only one country. So like I think until 2020 or 2010, we have only one great country. That is America. That was only one great power. But I don't think we have only one great power these days, right? So because of rise of China, so I think that China could possibly fight against the U.S. right now. So then we can say we have two great powers, right? And then before the U.S. Is only one hegemony power. Before that, we have USSR and the USA. So that was also two great powers. If you go to Europe, then we have bunch of great powers. We have Denmark, UK. UK is not. I mean, it's Brexit, so UK is not member of EU. We have Germany, France. Those kind of countries are very powerful, and then their power in terms of power very similar. So it's more than one great power within the EU. And then if we come to Asian countries, Japan, we can say it's very strong country. Korea is also a very strong country. And China, yes, also it's very a strong country. North Korea, even though economically it's really bad, but they have nuclear weapons. So we can't just neglect them. From that perspective, within Asia, we have more than three great powers. So they focus on like how many great powers. based on this international structure. So great powers actually can arrange international structure, and based on this great how many great powers we have, the behaviors of a state can be revealed. Okay, the behaviors of state behave in a similar way based on how many great powers we have. So, basic idea is international structure, and then why there is war, or why the state act in a similar way. It's so for classical realist, it focus on the human nature, but it focus on not a human nature, but anarchical situation. So international system itself, the characteristics of international system. So international system is anarchy. So anarchy means there is no absolute power. So there is absence of central government. That means what? If you were in domestic politics, if you committed crime, then what happened? Then you will go to jail, right? It's because there is government, central government. But in anarchy, even though you wage a war, there will be no punishment towards the country because of absence of central government. So that is anarchical situation. There is no hierarchy. It's anarchy, and the need for state to provide for their own security. That's actually the major thing. So since there is no central government, no government will protect us. So that based on that idea, state they have to provide their own security. No one will help. So I think that's very classic idea, right? So, I mean, we South Korea heavily depend on the U.S., but see what U.S. is doing right now to us, right? They deprive things from us. We have to pay money to them. It's not free. I mean, no one. So I believe it's true. So states should provide their own security. That's actually international relations. That's actually law. So we shouldn't depend on one country these days. And states, why there's war? Because not leaders or domestic factors, but so domestic factors or leaders not important, but international structure. So if international structure is more like complicated, then there will be more likely war. So some scholars like bipolar, some scholars who support bipolar, they think that bipolar is very stable. So you don't have to worry about war. So there will be no war in bipolar system. If you have more than two great powers, like if there are three, then it's really hard to read the signal. So in two great powers, it's very easy. If you're a small country, there's something you shouldn't do is that you shouldn't bug or bother the great powers. That's it. So it's very easy to read signals. If it's unipolar, it depends on what kind of great powers characteristic it has. So like the U.S. is more like it was more like a peaceful. So there are more free, like free wills to do, but if it's more than two great powers, so from small states perspective, it's really hard and complicated to read the signals that great powers send. So it's more likely misunderstand the signals. So there will be more likely there will be a war. So that's the idea of a multipolar system, bipolar, unipolar system. So I mean, we'll have a chance to maybe learn what's the difference. But difference I already explained. So if there are more than two great powers, we call that multipolar. If there are two great powers, we call that bipolar system. And unipolar, only there is one great power. So if there is one great power, the peace depends on what kind of characteristic that one bipolar, one unipolar country has. If that country is very aggressive, then there will be very unstable unsafe kind of international system. But if unipolar characteristic country is very calm and they are peace loving, then there will be peace loving international relations. And the main goal of state is security. They want to have a secure security. How can they have a security? Then the more power do you have, the more security you will have. So it's very similar to classical realism in terms of how can we achieve survival or security. You should have more power. So the anarchical system and distribution of capabilities are powerful constraints and inducement which produce sameness. So they kind of this neo-realist, they try to explain why in a certain circumstances why so many states, even despite their unsimilarity among like the I mean in terms of domestic political arrangement, why do they act in a similar way? That's what they wanted to ask for, and the answer is distribution of power, international structure. So that's neo-realism. So that's we finished up. So it was quite a part, and then we will learn of defensive realism and offensive realism. So we call this structural realism. So it started with classical realism and classical realism, neo-realism, and structural realism. Structural realism we can divide into two: defensive and offensive. So the I here you can click in. So let me click in. I'm not sure you can see that. You can see it, right? I mean, Stephen Lobel's article. So I put Stephen Lobel's article. It's free. So you can click on, then you can download the articles by Stephen Lobel's article. Stephen Lobel was my advisor when I studied in the Utah. I think he's quite old, so I don't think he worked there anymore. I think he retired because when I was in masters, it was 20 years ago. So yeah, it was 20 years ago. He was about 40. So yeah, I think he retired. He was more than 40 at the time. Anyway, so he's quite famous. So he's quite famous, and he is a defensive realist. Well, he didn't die, so he must be defensive realist. So we'll talk about defensive versus offensive realist. So defensive, like offensive, like you attacked. So do you feel offended? That means like, how should I say? So like for instance, we can divide a certain weapons as a defensive reason or offensive reason. So like nuclear weapons used to uh, categorized as offensive weapons, but these days it's more like defensive. It try to defend, right? It's offended to make so you want it to offend, that means you want it to attack. That kind of attacking kind of things. Defend is as the word itself designated explains. So you want to protect. That's more like it. So there are two structural realism: of defensive realism or offensive realism. So they try to explain it encourages states to maximize their security or to maximize their power and influence. So structural realists, they try to explain whether state, they try to maximize their security. If state, they try to maximize their security, then they are defensive realist. So if you wanted to buy weapons for defensive, then it's more likely the country is more likely to maximize their security. That's defensive realist. Or they try to maximize their power and influence, then they would buy more offensive weapons, right? Then these states are offensive realists. And whether conquest and expansion pays or not, that's very important questions to ask. So to distinguish who are the defensive realists and offensive realists, they should answer the question whether conquest and expansion pays or not. That means whether conquest and expansion is expensive, or is it the cost is more than benefit. That's the right question to ask. So let's say China wanting to expand their power to Korea. So what can they do is they wage a war against South Korea. If they won, then they can make South Korea as part of China, right? So, but is this conquest, is this expansions co- more costly than benefit or more beneficial than cost? So if they think that conquest and expansion pays, so if it's more expensive, if answer is yes, then you will be defensive. So defensive really thinks that conquest and expansion pays a lot. It's not cheap. So they think that usually the conquest and expansions are more costly than beneficial. So if you think like that way, then you are much more defensive realist. But conquest and expansion does not pay much, then you are much more offensive realist. So they think that some people think that conquest and expansions always better, always beneficial than the cost. Then we call this offensive realist. And how uncertainty and anarchy work in international society. Uh, so, so it's definitely, un, uh, we. It's not easy to read intention. It's almost impossible to read people's intentions. That's, I mean, and anarchy doesn't really change the things. So that's how we should. I mean, that's the if I mean we never know someone's intention. I mean, intention. So all we can do is we have to understand the behaviors. That's actually what many realists think. But structural realists and the defensive realist and offensive realist, so they both agree these two things. So they both think that yeah, defensive realists and offensive realists both thinks that uncertainty and anarchy in international society is inevitable. So they all think that it's true, but the result is different. So because it's not easy to read everyone's real intention, so we have to prepare the worst case scenario for the offensive realists. So that's why we have to have more weapons. So we have to have more power to prevent the war, or we have to attack first. But defensive realists, they are not sure, and the people's uh, intention. But so that's why we have to focus on defense, not offense. So we never know. So if we never know the intention, so what we have to do is we have to protect ourselves. That's the first thing. So that's the difference between offensive realist and defensive realist. So let's go a little bit more deeper to learn defensive realist. So the defensive realist uh, and offensive realist. So the defensive realist, offensive, even though they are both structural realism. So structure, it sounds really familiar, right? So international structure. So who actually argued that? Neo-realist. So they actually share the same assumptions with neo-realism. That's security. So they think that the security is the most important, but they think that international structure matters, but they think that security is plentiful, so you don't have to worry about that much. It's not that disaster. So offensive real is security is scarce. So security is very rare thing. So we have to have more security. That's the basic difference between defensive and offensive realism. And defensive realism thinks that anarchical structure of international system encourages state to maintain moderate and reserved policies to attain security. So yeah, it's anarchy, but we don't have waste our energy to wage a war. I mean, all we have to do is we have to preserve, we have to reserve, we have to moderate to attain security, because security is plentiful. You don't have to necessarily to get it. And then modern military technology and current geographic boundaries between states make conquest difficult. So they think that why security is plentiful for the defensive realists, it's because modern military technology development. So as you know, it's not easy to attack a certain country, right? It's pretty right. It's because it's very expensive. So we actually have observed the war between Russia and Ukraine. And then of course the Ukraine get a lot of help from Western society. And then but these days new techniques are using like drone techniques. These are expensive, right? Robotics. So very expensive to wage a war. So and the conquest was is very difficult these days. Geographical boundaries, yes. So when when Russia start to wage a war against Ukraine, they think that the war will end within a week. But it's not it, because yeah, I mean maybe the Ukraine is one of the poorest country in the world. So they didn't want, I mean they don't maybe have a military technology, but they had because of Western society. But the current geographic boundaries, yeah, because of this. So the Russia couldn't expect the all the Western society would help Ukraine like this. So the conquest became very expensive in Russia, and still, so that's why state will support the status quo. So status quo means they want you to maintain each status. That's status quo. But so, for instance, like South Korea, we satisfy what we are in right now. So in terms of like level, rank, like military rank or economy rank, we're quite satisfied. So may the defense realist thinks that most country, they are satisfied what they are belong to. So if you're middle income country, yeah, I mean that status quo quite satisfying. And aggression, competition, expansion will just lead security dilemma and counterbalancing behavior. So that is increase its security. So state balance against hegemony. So let me explain this. Uh, so what is security dilemma? So it's like this. So a country. So let's say I'll give you an example: North and South Korea. So North Korea bought weapons, and South Korea saw it. So they think that, oh, North Korea bought a one weapon, so we should buy more expensive one than that. But we don't know North Korea's real intention, right? So we bought a more expensive one, and then the North Korea actually saw we bought more expensive weapons. The North Korea was surprised. So North Korea is buy more expensive one. So that's actually the security dilemma. And then the security dilemma, so based on this security dilemma, but the problem is to increase the security, I mean, to increase their own security, the states actually respond with balancing. That means they may form alliance. You know, like security dilemma is more expensive. So some scholars think that there will be keep security dilemma like that. So A country will buy this weapon, B country will more expensive weapon, and security dilemma will be continue. But according to defensive realists, they don't really think like that way. So they think that the state will come up with different idea that is balancing. So they think that to increase their own security, so they can't spend money like that. So they respond with balancing. That means there will be make military build up or alliance formation. So they say like, oh, well, let's stop, to to security dilemma, but let's be an alliance, right? So this will be like a counterbalancing behavior. So state that's how state balance against hegemon, right? So which ultimately constrain the would be hegemon. So this is the argument of defensive realists. So uh, they don't really have to worry about the security. And why there will be a war? Because of structural modifier. Who is a structural modifier these days? So there is international security, but there is someone who want to modify this status. So for instance, like China. China is status structure modifier. So it was unipolar system, right? But China wanted to change the hegemon that was the America, and then China became revisionist. So China want to be modify the international structure right now. They wanted to change as they wanted. So China is a structural modifier. So if there is state structural modifiers, then there will be likely more war. So do you believe that in a foreseeable future there will be a war or not? According to offensive realist, defensive realist, I think neoclassical realist, a classical realist, or a realist. I think most realists argue they saying there will be a war because of China. So if there is a structural modifiers like China, then there will be war. So according to even defensive realists, there will be a war. So what is main goal of state? You should have more security. And the last, how can we achieve the security? To attain security, they have to maintain moderate and reserved policies. So they have to have a more defensive perspective, like status quo. So the state should have a maintain moderate and reserved policies to maintain its status quo. That's defensive realism. And let's talk about offensive realism. So for offensive realism, it's vice versa of defensive realism. They think that security is scarce. So it's not easy to get. It's very rare. So states seek to maximize their power. So because there is not enough security, what states should do is they should maximize their power. That's very similar to classical realism, even though the starting point is different. The starting point for classical realism is human nature, but offensive realism is structure. And then Walker's distribution of power. That's very similar to classical realism, neo-realism. So neo-realism is structural realist as well. So they start with international structure, and then the structural realist, offensive and defensive realist, it's more complicated than the structural realist. And then maximize their share of war power and to secure superiority. So that's offensive realism. So whenever they have chance, they have to become hegemon so that you can have more power. So power security is always not uh, everywhere. It's not available. So they have to maximize their power. And then war occurs when there is distribution of power. So if there's international structure has been changed, and then they have to maximize their share of the world power. So they have to be number one in the world, ranking number one. So that's maximize their share of world power, and they to seek superiority to any country. So it's better to have a you if you. It's always better to be world number one, but you should. If you can't, then you have to develop to be the world number one or world number two, like that. So to become hegemon, that's how you achieve. So it's very important that not to be attacked, right? Then to become hegemon, it's not easy to be attacked by other countries. So they adopt competitive, offensive, expansionist policy whenever the benefits exceed the cost. So they usually like offensive realists thinks that the expansion always benefits exceed the cost. So usually like whenever you have a chance, then you have to attack. Whenever you have the chance, you have to take over. So you have to take very competitive, offensive expansionist policy. So status quo powers are rare. That's very opposite idea of uh, defensive realists, because defensive realists thinks that quo is a very normal thing. So most of countries they want to be status quo, but they think that only a few countries uh, only a few countries is satisfied their status and stay status quo. So usually, states do not want to satisfy their status. That's the offensive realism. And we will talk about power transition realism. So usually, like defensive realist, the one of the defensive realist Lobel. Offensive realist is I can't remember his name. He's professor from Chicago University. I'm not sure he's still alive. Still alive. I can't remember his name, but I'll let you know. I'll let you know. I mean, he's very famous. I can't remember. So let me ask ChatGPT. Offensive, offensive realist. Wow, I can't remember his name. So I actually met him in person in a conference. I met him. If I can't remember his name. Wow. Anyway, so that I will let you know. And then we'll learn power transition realism. It's Ogansky. So Ogansky is the major, one of the main power transition realists. So power transition realist is easy to know because it's not that difficult. So power transition realism argues that the war between major powers is least likely when the international system is dominated a single state and when there is absence of rising challengers being for system leadership. So they think that the power transition realism is that so there is a one cycle. So let's say like we had the Rome that was power number one, and then but Rome collapsed, and the U.S. collapsed, UK collapsed, and there was always war when when this great power collapsed and the newcomers came to power. There was always war like that. So war between main powers is least likely when the international system is dominated single state. But so if there is only one single state dominating international system, then there will be no power, no war. But it's not happen. It doesn't really happen in the world. So when there is an absence of rising challengers being for a system leaderships, then there will be no war. You don't have to worry about it. So if there is no like China, so it's rising challengers, right? But if China is not does not exist, when we don't have to worry about war. But unfortunately, there is no such thing. So power transition realism is about this. So every country, when they become a great power, then there is a certain period of time that they will be collapsed. So if there is a rise of power, then there will be a falling power, and then there is another riser. So power transits all the time. So power has been changed. That's what it is about. So there is in the history, if we look at history, there is no such country. Long time ago, it was very powerful. And even now, it's powerful quite a long time. There is no such country in the world, right? So that's the power traditionalism argues. So privileged position is capable of shaping the rules and practices of international system in a such way as satisfy It's selfish interest. So that's how they stable allies for a while. So if the U.S. became privileged position, right? And then what they did is they tried to make other country democracy, and they tried to make, oh yeah, Mearsheimer. Yeah, I remember his name. Sorry. So offensive realist Mearsheimer, John Mearsheimer. He is the one of the biggest name in the field. I read his book articles a lot. I really respect him. He is very smart writer. I love his writing. It's very his article was very readable. So I may assign his articles, but anyway, yeah, it's a Joe Mearsheimer. But anyway, it's Ogansky is about that. So privileged positions. The U.S. was privileged position at once upon a time, and then it make a country whole world try to accept liberal market economy, right? So neoliberal market economy. Everyone should get rid of tariffs, right? And free trade. It's where this free idea of free trade come from the U.S. and UK, right? So that's privileged position. They they become privileged. I mean, the U.S. become privileged position, and they shape the rules and practice in international system like democracy and free trade in such a way as to satisfy its selfish interest. So by doing so, the U.S. get a lot of benefit out of it. So that's how U.S. become and maintain its privileged position. That's stability. So once they become a privileged position, they will set the rules, and that rules will give a benefits, and that's how they maintain power. So that's stability. So they will stable for a while. But if time goes down, and time goes by, the stability will be collapsed, right? As we can see. But there was no war between the U.S. and the U.K. when the U.S. become the world leader, right? That's the only time that we didn't see the large war. So usually, like the power transition realist thinks that there will be privileged position, and then there will be challenger. For a while, this privileged ones they will maintain power like for maybe 30 years, and then the challengers will challenge each position, and there will be a war, and then this challenger will be in power for like 30 years, and then later there will be another challenger like this. So as the power becomes more evenly matched, war over system leadership will is likely to occur. That means like if the war power between the two countries. So China, U.S. They are very similar, right? It's if they are more evenly similar, then there will be more likely a war. But if the gap's huge, so U.S. is let's say much more powerful than China, there will be no war. But there's no such. I mean, it's not like that, right? So decline hegemon may launch a preventative war to preserve its status as the world's top leaders. The rising challenger could initiate a war to capture the top spot and all the benefits that goes along with it. So decline, there will be maybe two kinds of war: preventive war, or the challengers will be divisionist war. So they wanted to change the position. So there will be two kinds, but even though declining hegemon launch preventative war to preserve its status, it's not easy to maintain its status once they initiate war because it's already declined. And then if a state undergone the war, even though they won the war, maybe they will stay for maybe 2 or 3 more years or 10 more years, but definitely it will lose someday. There is no forever kind of privileged position. So power transition realism depicts the course of human history as a successive rise and fall of great powers. So power transition realism thinks that state is like a human being, so there will be rise and fall all the time. So there is a certain period of time for rise and certain period of time to fall. And differential growth rates are main caused by process inter- internal to states, including time of industrialization, bureaucratic politics, productivity, nature, economy, and technological innovation. So why then there is rise power, falling power? It's because of domestic reasons. So maybe China become a huge challenger because of the domestic reasons. So they have economic and technological innovation, right? And it's much faster than the U.S. And in terms of population, it has more population. And then the bureaucratic politics and productivity is very efficient, even though it's not a democracy. And then the U.S. could become the world leader. It's because of timing of industrializations. So industrialization is like it's not a first or third wave of industrialization. It's about like fourth or fifth industrialization we are talking about, like AI kind of things. It's actually the China is faster, a lot faster than the U.S. That's power transition realism.